Lieutenant Karras looked up and watched the sky fall. Disturbed clouds swirled and dispersed as hundreds of blocky, jet-streaming shapes broke through them. Dropships, haulers, armor transporters, from the boxy crew compartments of Valkyries to the stunted fat noses of Arvis lighters. Most of the ships belonged to the Navis Imperialis carriers that had taxied them all here. Others, though, were done up in the colors of the 179th Krieg Assault Regiment, artfully requisitioned by the regiment's own Colonel Madoc. 20 minutes ago, Karras had been on one of those lighters, watching through the armor-glass windows as the spires of Hive Gorgoth got closer. Around the city, a spiderweb of trenches, artillery dugouts, and tank traps spread like scan lines on a vid-screen monitor. Home for the foreseeable future. Or, more likely, until the untimely death of Corpsman 318894923 Karras.
Lieutenant,
The battery watchmaster called. He was sat next to the battery's auto-scribe, gently feeding out the paper as the quills manically scribbled orders, coordinates, and ordnance recommendations.
Grid 3642.
The watchmaster continued.
There's a convoy of stolen civilian vehicles making for the spaceport. Grenadiers are on their way, but they want us to soften them up.
We just got here, Karras thought, glancing east towards the grid 3642, and they're already trying to run. Battery 1, this is Lieutenant Karras. All guns on grid 3642. Three muffled voices hummed obeisance through his comm bead. His own watchmaster flashed a brief, informal thumbs up. The cannon Karras was accompanying, the battery's largest gun, was a siege cannon that had seen even more battles than the 179th had. The loader rammed a new shell home, stepping sharply back as the cannoneer dropped the breech shut. 3 salvos, starting at 3642, range to 3643 to account for vehicle movement. The salvo started with a curt nod to his watchmaster. Karras felt the blast more than he heard it. It hit him like a bolter round to the chest, strong enough to shake him backwards and send viscous ripples through the dugout's muddy floor. Moments, mere moments after the siege cannon's shell had passed its muzzle, the other 3 guns of the 1st Battery of the 3rd Company of the 1st Battalion of the 179th Assault Regiment added their voices. One more large piece, a siege mortar with a bore large enough to fit a corpsman into, and 2 smaller bombast field cannons. The noise smothered the sounds of the still descending dropships once, twice, then a pause as the cannoneers changed their aim to target grid 3643. An Arvis lighter changed course as the final salvo cleared, peeling away from the throng of descending aircraft with the thrumming warble of engines. It was painted in the field blue of Karras's greatcoat, a proud red diamond bearing the Aquila and a bold white 179th, one of the Colonel's prized grenadier squads, sent to ensure no rogue elements actually reached that spaceport. The iron shackle around Hive Gorgoth would be closed, hammered shut, and tightened until compliance could be regained. Karras felt pride for a single shameful second, pride at having fired the first shot of the Corps' engagement on this world. He bit it back with a mantra. In life, shame. In death, atonement. Heads down! Karras shouted, throwing himself to his knees even as he watched the shell arc towards him. Unable to outrun it and refusing to abandon his battery even if he could, Karras mumbled a litany of protection through numb lips. The shell missed the gun and the lieutenant by a handful of meters. Karras pitched to his knees and the mud beneath him seemed to drop away. His ears rang and his mouth watered with a bitter, acidic saliva, but that was the extent of his injury. The litany of protection turned quickly to a litany of thanks mid-sentence. For 2 days now, 3rd Company had spat hell at Hive Gorgoth. A day ago, the Hive had started to return fire. They had hit the front lines hardest, but Karras had seen casualty reports from 4th Battery. The Krieg artillery lines weren't invulnerable. Watchmaster! Karras shouted, standing from his crouch and straightening his greatcoat. Head count!
4893 Vern is down!
The watchmaster shouted back, rolling the loader's corpse onto its back. The corpsman's back had caught the brunt of the explosion, and a sick, sweet smell of char flitted into Karras's nose despite the gas mask. The lieutenant grumbled and wiped dirt from his eye lenses. Set him aside for the quartermaster. I'll take over. Karras keyed his comm bead even as he skidded to a muddy halt by the gun's munitions crates. Observer Squad Theta, give me a grid on those guns.
Copy, Lieutenant.
The Observer Squad had been slowly dwindling since the artillery had started. Their acting watchmaster had been replaced twice now, and the unit was down to 6 strong. With the crack of rust-shut hinges, Karras hauled a new munitions crate open. Bright, greased brass casings glinted at him, each stamped proudly with an Aquila. He scooped the sawdust packing material out with both hands, dumping it over the side in a messy heap. Karras stopped. He didn't mean to, but that one small noise. He reached down and brushed away the pile of sawdust he had dropped. Sat begrudgingly in the middle of it was a lump of fur just smaller than the shells fired by the battery's smaller bombast cannons. It was scabby, toothy, and staring at the lieutenant with strange slit eyes. Instinctively, against both better sense and training, Karras reached for it with a single gloved finger. He expected it to snap, to bite at the stranger that had just showered it with cellulose packaging. Instead, it leaned into the corpsman's touch, chin scratching against the sun-bleached leather of his gloves.
Lieutenant,
Karras jerked up, fingers pressed against the comm bead on instinct.
we've got your grit. Hear us?
Observer, this is Battery Command, Karras replied, hauling the cannon shell from the box, leaning against the wooden crate. Clear your signal, Corpsman. You're sending static.
Scrap. Code. Invox. Grid 523. Repeat, grid 5293.
The line went dead, but Karras had his grid. The long-range Voxnet could wait. He wrapped his arms around the greased brass casing of the artillery shell, hauling it up to the siege cannon's steps to the breach. The little feline thing watched him from its spot behind the stowage. All guns, free salvos on grid 5293. Turn their guns to rubble. 2 minutes later, Karras ordered a halt. Grid 5293 had been engulfed in smoke and dust, visible even from Karras's trench. Observer squad report. Nothing. Just static, garbled and whining. Yurton's teeth. Lieutenant Karras mounted the ladder at the edge of his dugout, peering out into the pockmarked no man's land. Someone find a tech priest. The long ranges... The words choked in his throat as a single prick of green light shot up from the horizon. A flare, whistling and hissing, shooting upwards from the position he had ordered his observer squad to station themselves. One green flare. Chemical attack imminent. Gas, he shouted over Vox, scrambling down the ladder. Check your masks! He clamped a hand to the intake of his rebreather and sucked in. He felt the soothing, reassuring pressure of airtight fabric pressing against his face. Safe. Relatively, at least. The Colton Gorgoth had been small when the 179th had arrived. No reports of corrupting influence yet. Whatever miasmas the heretics could throw at them would be just that. Poisons, corrosives, things cooked up in a vat in some under-Hive slum drug den. His crew signaled their masks were tight, and Karras waited as the watchmasters of each battery confirmed the same. The next flares hissed into the sky as the final report came in. 2 green flares. Chemical agent deployed. Keep the barrage, Karras ordered. Target grids 5293 through 97. I want their guns destroyed by nightfall. Lieutenant looked down. The mangy little feline had crawled its way out from under its cover of ammo crates. It padded towards the lieutenant, mud clumping in its leg fur, staring up at him through the tinted lenses covering his eyes. And Corpsman 318895923 Karras felt something that he had assumed he and all of his siblings in the Corps had lost. Pity. There was a chance this little one could survive. That the pathogen was made specifically for humans and not felines, or that the gas wouldn't be heavy enough to reach so low in the trench. But the men and women of the 179th Assault Regiment did not work on chance. Emperor, forgive me for this misappropriation of your goods. Karras plucked the thing up by its scruff, slogging through the mud until he reached the slumped body of loader 5893 Vern. The blast had charred and destroyed the straps and fastenings that held his rebreather unit to his face. Too destroyed for the quartermaster to find use of it, Karras reasoned. He peeled the face mask from the loader's body, much too large for the feline, but better than nothing. The little thing kicked and mewled as he held its head into the face mask, nestled as far towards the rebreather portion as it would go, clamping hands around its neck firm enough to hopefully make something of a seal. Karras looked back in time to see the first green fingers of Chem Agent tease themselves over the dugout's lip. He held the feline firm, taking shallow breaths himself. Behind him, the watchmaster spared him confused glances as he ordered his gun crew to maintain the barrage. Karras was allowed 5 hours of sleep between shifts. Lucky, as a lieutenant. Most of his battery only got 4. The next night, Lieutenant Karras spent most of his allotted hours cutting and suturing the face mask of Corpsman 5893 into something more or less functional for an animal. The quartermaster had deemed it too destroyed to be worth repairing. He hadn't asked why Karras wanted to keep it. The lieutenant overturned a used shell crate, emptied half of the sand from a spare sandbag, and draped a spare square of tarp over it. About as comfortable as his own cot, which didn't say much. But if this creature would be sharing their dugout, it would also have to share its luxuries. Chem Agent still wafted intermittently from Hive Gorgoth. Each morning, Karras had to replace his rebreather unit's filter after hours upon hours of clogging it with the airborne gunk the city's cultists were throwing at them. Today, Karras mounted the trench ladders and expected the same. It's still. Karras narrowed his eyes and leaned against the earthwork, magnoculars pressed to his eye lenses. No gas, no artillery.
We've been watching them for hours,
his watchmaster confirmed, leaning against the wooden trench wall.
Their artillery went quiet at 0400. The gas dispersed, and they haven't bothered to replace it yet.
Have you told the captain?
Negative, sir. The infantry in the front lines probably saw it first anyway. I'm sure the colonel knows.
All the same, Karras pushed himself from the ladder, boots squelching messily into the sloppy ground. Box it in. The crew were taking the lull to service the gun. The loader's replacement, Corpsman 1399 Dreda, was slid beneath it, greasing pistons and pivot points. Karras made for the battery autoscribe, murmuring a litany of repair and providing it exactly 4 taps of percussive maintenance. Dutifully, it whined awake, quill arms skittering to life. The feline, jumping on the table, batted at the parchment as the machine spit it out, until Karras waved it away. The scroll was gibberish. Karras read it, eyes scrolling over the illegible chicken scratch. The only words he could read, placed firmly in the center, were printed in blotted Gothic. Hold fast. The autoscribe skittered to life again, gears and servos whining as its quills gained speed. It spat parchment faster, faster, until it ran out and the sheet fell in ribbons into the mud. Karras carefully, warily, plucked it from the muck and tried to read it. The scrawling hurt his eyes, hurt his head, driving an ice pick through his forehead. Behind him, 1399 Dreda began to cough. Lieutenant Karras didn't need to know the specifics. The years following the Cicatrix Maledictum's opening had been illuminating for many, and Karras knew corruption when he saw it. "All batteries!" he shouted into his comm bead, casting the parchment into the mud and stamping it down with a boot heel. "Stand ready, the enemy comes!" The gas didn't come from the enemy lines. This time it seeped from the earth itself, rising in curling talons from the floor, the walls, every corner of the artillery dugout. 1399 Dreda spluttered, coughing and convulsing as the watchmaster dragged him from beneath the gun. The edges of his rebreather mask had been eaten away, dissolved and fused with his skin where it touched. Karras granted him the Emperor's mercy, if only to stop the screaming. Even after Dreda was silenced, the quiet had been broken. Peering over the dugout's lip, Karras watched the horizon heave. From their own dugouts, foxholes, trenches, and bolt holes, things marched. Things with too many limbs, with too much weight and not enough muscle. Things that should not be moving, but were. Hold fast. The final order stood. Karras ordered his battery to fire free. Bombasts, mortars, and siege cannons sent rippling waves of concussive death through the encroaching horde. The casings piled until there was little room to move. The wave of rippling unflesh flooded the infantry company's front lines. They were shelling their own now, but they still fired, walking their barrage closer until they were practically firing vertically. Karras's head was filled with static. Comms were cut, flooded with scrap code and voices best left unheard. The lines of the 1st Battalion would be overrun. There was no avoiding that now. Karras had no doubt that the colonel was watching, but from the command dugout he might never know the specifics, the heresies, the force that it took to break the 3rd Company. The feline hadn't run. It hid, of course, tucked into its ramshackle bedding away from the noise of the guns, but it hadn't fled. Its slit yellow eyes found his, and Corpsman 31889-4923 Karras stared back. The lieutenant dug an unmuddied corner of the parchment from its heap on the ground, making sure to choose a piece without the eye-numbing scrawl. Breaking a pen from the autoscribe's still jittering arms, Lieutenant Karras penned the final report of the 3rd Company of the 1st Battalion of the Krieg 179th Assault Regiment. Signed, folded, and tucked into the makeshift strap of a gas mask on the feline the battery had adopted. "You run," Karras ordered the small corpsman. "You run away from this. You find someone, anyone who will read this. You make sure you pass on this note. Do you understand?" The feline made a strained, mewing noise. "The Emperor brought you to our battery," Karras continued, setting the feline back under the table. "He protects. He wills." He urged the animal on with a prodding, gloved finger. It scampered down the trench line, kicking up trails of mud behind. With his trust, his faith, placed in the Emperor and a feline he hadn't even had time to name, Lieutenant Karras drew his sidearm. The guns were firing nearly direct now, picking out the largest targets that got too close to the dugout's lip. "In life, war," he began, his voice soon joined by his cannoneers. "In death, peace. In life, shame. in death, atonement. Earn your atonement, Corman, Lieutenant Karras shouted, and drag these heretics back to hell with you. Thank you all so much for watching this new type of video for the channel. I always talk about how important storytelling is to me as a painter, so I figured it was about time that I put my money where my mouth is. This was just an off-the-cuff story, but if it's something that you'd like to see more on your feed, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I'll make sure the next one is even more polished. Of course, if you did enjoy, you can also drop a like and share the video with someone else that you think might like it. Drop a comment if you have any feedback, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one, and until next time friends, be safe, be kind, and don't you dare go hollow.